So our repair addendum is form 2.5. Let me pull it up. So one thing that you'll note here, all of our addenda to our sale agreements, okay, they're all going to look very familiar. They all start out with the sale agreement number here at the top. They have a space for the property address or description and the names of the parties. For those of you who've taken a look at our forms, you'll know that all of our forms and addenda have a place for buyer and for sellers to be identified. One key difference between our repair addendum and what you might be used to with OREF is that we don't have a buyer and a seller repair addendum. Okay, we just have a document 2.5 called the repair addendum, and on the document itself is where the person filling out the document will indicate whether it's coming from the buyer or the seller. Okay, and then there also is a place to number it should there be multiple repair addenda that are used. We have a space specifically in our repair addendum for repairs that must be completed by licensed and bonded contractors, and those repairs must be completed in a workmanlike manner. Okay, so that's the standard that we use to evaluate the sufficiency of the quality of the repairs. Okay, and that's a legal term that's used to essentially describe sort of what would be expected of a typical contractor of the type that you hired. Okay, is it essentially aligned with the typical industry standard? Okay, now there's also though space to indicate repairs that do not need to be completed by a licensed and bonded contractor. Okay, so those could be repaired directly by seller or the seller's father or son or whoever else it might be. Those repairs would be performed competently. Okay, so we don't have a legal standard by which to evaluate a seller who's not a licensed contractor to be doing repairs. So we wanted to include some form of standard to evaluate the quality of the repairs, and we decided to use competently. Okay, now the next section of this document is going to kind of lay out the process. So one thing that we have here is for a place for the parties to indicate the date by when the repairs must be completed. Okay, we think that's an important thing to include in the contract. Then I will note that we have this additional document that's called Form 2.23, Notice of Completion of Repairs. Okay, so that is a document that the seller will use, and we'll pull it up here shortly. That's the document that the seller will use to notify the buyer that the repairs have been completed. Okay, now once the buyer has been notified that the repairs have been completed, the buyer will have a certain number of days to re-inspect the property. The parties can choose between 3 business days or putting in a different number of days. Again, most of you who've seen our documents before will already know this, but the way we've set up our documents is that if you want to select the pre-printed number of days that's on the contract, then you need to check that box. So if you want it to be 3, you need to check this box that says 3. If you want it to be other than 3, then you check the other box and write what you want. Okay, but that is a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. We do not have it set up such that there's just a blank line and then we say that it defaults to 3. Okay, we want you to actually check the box that says 3. We think it's beneficial for everyone involved for affirmative and intentional decisions to be made and evidence that that was the case. So that's why we're asking you to affirmatively check boxes. Okay, now what we say here is that the buyer has this number of days, 3 or whatever they select, to conduct the reinspection. Okay, but they have to also notify seller if there are any deficiencies in the repairs and deliver evidence of those deficiencies. The buyer is also going to use the Form 2.23 to do that. Okay, so I might as well just pull it up right now and then we'll come back to this. But I'll show you how the 2.23 is set up so you can see how this would work. Okay, so essentially the top half of the document, section 3 here, seller hereby notifies buyer that the repairs agreed to in the repair addendum have been completed as described in that addendum. Okay, and then the seller would sign and date. The bottom half of the document can be used by the buyer to notify the seller if there are deficiencies in the repairs, and the buyer is required to provide evidence. Now, of course, if the buyer does not find any deficiencies in the repairs, no harm, no foul. They don't need to send this document back. This document is there for them to use if they find deficiencies in the repairs, okay? And they do need to provide evidence. And the key here, and you'll see up here, back in section 3, we're saying as described in that repair addendum, okay? So there's really two ways that repairs are described in the repair addendum. One is what's written in, what the repairs are, okay? And so if you want to be able to contractually hold the seller to doing something in a specific way or using a specific contractor, you need to specify that, okay? Because you can only be able to hold people accountable for what you've asked for, okay? But the second measure is the quality of the work, okay? And that's where the workmanlike manner comes in, or the competency in the seller repairs, okay? So if the repairs were not done as the parties had described them, okay, or they were not done in a workmanlike manner, if they were done by a contractor, those would both be reasons why a buyer could say that these repairs are deficient and send this document back to the seller and provide the evidence of those deficiencies, okay? So that is the notice of completion of repairs. We pull back up the repair addendum. So what buyers need to know is that if they do not notify the seller of deficiencies in the repairs and provide evidence of the same within the 3 business day period, or whatever number of days that they put here for reinspection, then the buyer will be deemed to have accepted the repairs, okay? So that is the buyer's opportunity to say that the seller has not completed the repairs as required. But once that opportunity goes by, then the buyer is not going to have another bite at that apple, okay? So it's important for a buyer to do their reinspection, and if they feel like something's wrong, to notify the seller at that time. We do have a provision that says until the end of the reinspection period, buyer may request copies of any invoices, and that seller must promptly deliver those. Okay, we do then have a correction period. So if the buyer does send back a 2.23, notifying the seller of deficiencies and providing evidence, then seller's going to have a correction period. Okay, after the correction period, then the buyer is going to either accept the repairs or is going to terminate, okay? Obviously, there could be disagreements between the parties that could go on forever about whether repairs were done properly or not, but it's just got to stop at some point, okay? So if a buyer says, hey, these repairs haven't been corrected, then the buyer can just terminate, okay? And if they're right about that, if the repairs were not done properly, then the buyer was going to be within their right to do that. If the buyer is just trying to get out of the contract and there's nothing deficient about the repairs, then the buyer is terminating a contract when they didn't have a right to do so. And that's just an issue that would have to be resolved through small claims or mediation arbitration. We can't solve the problem of the fact that a buyer and a seller may disagree with each other about whether repairs were done properly. But what we've done is just lay out a process for the parties to address that issue up to a point, and then they're going to have to utilize the dispute resolution provisions of the sale agreement if it goes beyond that. Okay, so that is the basic idea. Seller or whoever's receiving this document can either accept or reject it. Okay, if the person receiving the document is going to counter, okay, then they would want to reject this and then send a new version of the repair addendum, okay? And we don't have it set up like a counter offer where you would be incorporating the terms of the previous offer and then just indicating what's different, okay? We didn't want to do it that way. We thought that would be very confusing. So if a seller's going to reject this and then submit to the buyer their own version of a repair addendum of the repairs they want to do, the seller's going to be starting fresh in describing which repairs they want to do.